Sorry about last time. It was a good read, but I had a bad cough. I didn't get sick, so it was just something that a morning thing, getting everything out of my system, I guess. Sorry it was also so long, an hour and 6 minutes, but I'm not going back. Hopefully you can get through it. It was very rewarding regardless, at least for me. So I'm going to start chapter 4, and I'm going to try to make these shorter. I'm waking up later, so I don't have as much time to do these, but I might try to do several throughout the day, even with people walking around the house, etc. So we shall see. This is chapter 4. Indwelling sin is enmity against God. From thence comes its power. Thence its power admits of no peace nor rest, is against God himself, acts itself in aversion from God, and propensity to evil. It is universal to all of God. Not sure what that means. We'll see when we get to it. In all of the soul, constant. Okay. So he starts this chapter with the word secondly. Secondly, we have seen the seat and subject of this law of sin. We saw that it's in the heart, right? That was last time. So we know it's a law. We know its dwelling place is the heart, and of course heart means will, mind, affections, everything that makes up your soul. The stuff that people think that the brain is where the soul is, and that we're all just chemicals, and no, that's a functional part of your body, just like your heart is a functional part of your body that pumps blood. And when the Bible talks about heart, it's not talking about your physical heart that's pumping blood. It's not talking about your liver. It's not talking about your organs. But your brain is another organ. One of the common lies told to everyone these days is that you are your brain. Your brain is you. Keep your brain, keep his head, or keep Walt Disney's head frozen in a thing because that's him. No. He is a soul, and he has a body, and the brain is a functioning part of the body that helps move the body. The mind does use the brain to store information, to move the body, nerves and stuff like that. But the soul is all over. The soul uses the body, uses the brain. Anyway. Okay, we've seen the seat and subject of this law of sin. In the next place, we might take a view of its nature in general, which also will manifest its power and efficacy. But this I shall not enlarge upon, it being not my business to declare the nature of indwelling sin. It has also been done by others, so he's not going to go there. I shall therefore only in reference to our special design in hand consider one property of it that belongs to its nature, and this always, wherever it is. So he said that's what other books have been written about its nature. So I'm going to tell you one aspect of its nature. And it's part of his nature always, wherever it is. And this is that which is expressed by the apostle in Romans 8:7. The carnal mind is enmity against God. Let's go there. Romans 8. Seven. Okay. For the mind, I'm going to go to 6. For the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. Because the mind set on the flesh is hostile toward God. For it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. And here it says, the carnal mind, the mind set on the flesh is what I have in the NASB. It kind of breaks down carnal mind into its principal parts. The mind set on the flesh is hostile toward God. Enmity. Enmity is more of a powerful word. Let's see what. Hostile just kind of means, I don't like God, getting too close. And pulls out a 6-shooter and says, get away from me, God. But enmity against God kind of implies that it's actively seeking to destroy God, to ruin God, which is impossible, of course. That which is here called pronema tes sarkos, the wisdom of the flesh, is the name with the law of sin, is the same with the law of sin, which we insist on. So yeah, in Romans, in the Greek, it's pronema tes sarkos, which is the mind set on the flesh, and it has the wisdom of the flesh. So the wisdom, that's the literal translation, the wisdom of the flesh, the mind set on the flesh. Something a little bit more that we can understand, the mind set on the flesh, but the wisdom of the flesh is also really good. So I'm glad I read both of them. The wisdom of the flesh is the same as the law of sin. So you can use them interchangeably, is what he's saying. The law of sin. And what says Paul hereof? Why, it is ecthra eis theon, ecthra, enmity against God. NASB translates ecthra eis theon, to hostile against God, hostile toward God, enmity against God. I think both are valid translations of those 3 words, but it's still good. It just read both. It'll help you get a well-rounded. Yesterday we were talking about, I don't know if I can remember. I'm still tired, but is giving thanks the same as praising? And we looked up the Hebrew word. It was in in Psalm 139. I will give thanks. Is what the NASB says, and many of the other translations, including King James and ESV and all that, say praise. And we're saying, isn't there a difference? Praising is different from giving thanks. One can include the other, but the other can't include the one, I think. And we looked up the Hebrew word, and it did say that it can mean both. So we shouldn't exclude one for the other, but we can say, give praise and thanks. Add both. Increase the scope of the word. So that works. It is not only an enemy, for so possibly some reconciliation of it unto God might be made. But it is enmity itself. That's key. It's not an enemy, because that implies that some reconciliation can be made. So hostile toward God also seems to be, it's hostile. Let's make it not hostile. Let's subdue it so that this indwelling sin is not hostile toward God. It'll take some work, but let's work on it. But that it's pure hostility. It's not hostile. It is hostility toward God. Is that what it says in this version? And it just says it is hostile toward God. But enmity is even more powerful, because an enemy can be made into a friend. But enmity itself, you'd have to redefine the word. It'd have to become something completely different. Enmity, it says, it is not only an enemy, but it is enmity itself, and so not capable of accepting any terms of peace. Not capable of accepting any terms of peace. Enemies may be reconciled, but enmity cannot. Yea, the only way to reconcile enemies is to destroy the enmity. So the apostle in another case tells us, Romans 5:10, we who were enemies are reconciled to God. Let's look. For if while we were enemies we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. So Christ's death on the cross turns us from enemies of God, and when I say us, I mean the elect, turns us from enmity toward God to children of God. (5:10). If while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. We didn't become non-enemies. We didn't become friends of God before the death of his Son. The death of his Son changed us. Are more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. So, yes, we who were enemies are reconciled to God. That is a work compassed and brought about by the blood of Christ, the reconciling of the greatest enemies. But when he comes to speak of enmity, there is no way for it. So here's an example of what he's saying in 5:10, Romans 5:10. There's an example of an enemy becoming a friend through the sacrifice of Christ. Reconciliation. Now, but he's saying with enmity itself, there is no way for it, but it must be abolished and destroyed. You can't change enmity into friendship. You must destroy the enmity itself. The enmity is in an enemy. The enmity must be destroyed before the enemy can become a friend. It must be abolished and destroyed. Ephesians 2:15. Quote, having abolished in his flesh the enmity. Repeat Ephesians 2:15. Galatians, Ephesians 1:2. I'll go back to 14. For he himself is our peace. That's Christ. He himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall by abolishing in his flesh the enmity. And it doesn't say hostility. This is the NASB. By abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both in one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. Enmity must be put to death. There is no way to deal with any enmity whatever but by its abolition and destruction. I'll read a little more. And this also lies in it, as it is enmity, that every part and parcel of it, if we may so speak, the least degree of it that can possibly remain in any one, whilst and where there is anything of its nature, is enmity still. So there's no part of indwelling sin that's less than enmity. It's all enmity, right from left to right. Every piece of it. It may not be so effectual and powerful in operation as where it has more life and vigor, but it is enmity still. Even the weakest parts of this indwelling sin in believers and is still enmity. Even the least effectual parts are still enmity against God. As every drop of poison is poison and will infect, and every spark of fire is fire and will burn, so is everything of the law of sin, the least of it. It is enmity, it will poison, it will burn. That which is anything in the abstract is still so, whilst it hath any being at all. Our apostle, who may well be supposed to have made as great a progress in the subduing of it as any one on the earth, yet after all cries out for deliverance as from an irreconcilable enemy. Romans 7:24. And I think that's that. Who will, wretched man that I am, who will set me free from this body of death? So even Paul, who had the most advancement in his perfectionism, so to speak, because we can never obtain perfectionism this side of death. And I know there's a heresy that it's a mild heresy because many great theologians held it, of being able to be perfect this side of death. Perfection doesn't happen until later. It's glorification. So yes, even Paul, who could probably be as perfect a disciple as an apostle as one could find on earth, he still cried out, "O wretched man that I am." The meanest acting, the meanest and most imperceptible working of it, is the acting and working of enmity. And doesn't mean meanie. It means even the tiniest working of it. Mortification abates of its force, but doth not change its nature. Notice he's talking about mortification of sin, and that's in the same volume. I didn't read that one. I might go back and read it because it is a important work. And it's much shorter than this one. Maybe I should have tackled that one first, but I really wanted to. Being a believer, knowing he has indwelling sin, this really was something I wanted to get to help me. So mortification of sin is also a good work by Owen. He brings it up here. So mortification abates of its force, but does not change its nature. So you can't change enmity into something else through mortification. What you can do is just weaken the indwelling sin through mortification. Grace changes the nature of man, but nothing can change the nature of sin. That's a great line. What a great quote. Grace changes the nature of man, but nothing can change the nature of sin. Whatever effect be wrought upon it, there is no effect wrought in it, but that it is enmity still, sin still. This then, by it, is our state. is our state and condition. God is love. 1 John 4:8. This then, by it, is our state and condition. God is love. I know that everybody knows that God is love, but let's go to it. 1 John 4:8. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. He is so in himself, so God is love. So now he's going to just describe, I think, the entire condition here. So God is love. He is so in himself, eternally excellent and desirable above all. He is so to us. He is so in the blood of his Son and in all the inexpressible fruits of it, by which we are what we are, and wherein all our future hopes and expectations are wrapped up. Against this God we carry about us an enmity all our days, an enmity that has this from its nature, that it is incapable of cure and reconciliation. Incapable of cure and reconciliation. Destroyed it may be, it shall be, but cured it cannot be. If a man has an enemy to deal withal that is too mighty for him, as David had with Saul, he may take the course that he did. Consider what it is that provoked his enemy against him, and so address himself to remove the cause and make up his peace. 1 Samuel 26:19, quote, If the Lord have stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord. Let's look at that. He may take the course that he did. Consider that it is what it is that provoked his enemy against him, and so address himself to remove the cause and make up his peace. 1 Samuel 26:19. This is going flipping way back. 2 Samuel 1. I'm getting close. 21, 22, 1 Samuel 22, 24. I was very close when I was at 2 Samuel 1. No, I skipped it because these two pages don't want to turn. You're like thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, he's flipping through the Bible again. I'm going to go crazy. Say something. Goodness, 26. 26:19. Okay. And Saul recognized David. Let's go to 17. Saul recognized David's voice and says, Is this your voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my lord, the king. He also said, Why then is my lord pursuing his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in my hand? Now therefore, please let my lord the king listen to the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is men, cursed are they before the Lord, for they have driven me out today, so that I would have no attachment with the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go serve other gods. I'll go back a little bit in John Owen. Destroyed it may be, it shall be, but cured it cannot be. If a man has an enemy to deal with that is too mighty for him, as David had with Saul. So Saul is the enemy that David has to deal with, and he's too mighty for him. He may take the course that he did. Consider what it is that provoked his enemy against him, and so address himself to remove the cause and make up his peace. So if the Lord, so here's this question to Saul: If the Lord has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. So let me I gotta try to do something to stop this. But if they be the children of men, if this hatred toward me is something just from the dark soul of men, then cursed be they before the Lord. Come it from God or man, whether this sin comes from God or man, there is yet hope of peace. But when a man has enmity itself to deal with, nothing is to be expected but continual fighting to the destruction of the one party. If it be not overcome and destroyed, it will overcome and destroy the soul. That's where I'm going to end. But yes, if this were just something that God is using to discipline his children, there's hope of peace in this world, in this life. If it be just fighting wicked men, dealing with wicked people, there is hope of peace in this life. You can make peace with an enemy. But we're talking about enmity itself, indwelling sin in believers. And Owen is telling us nothing is to be expected but continual fighting to the destruction of the one party. One of us is going to be overcome by it, or we're going to overcome it. It will not, if it's not overcome and destroyed, it will overcome and destroy the soul. And that's where I'm going to end there. This was a little bit shorter, 26 minutes, but I just wanted to get a little bit in to know that I'm still here and that I enjoy doing this and continue doing it. So I will continue next time. It may be later today, it may be tomorrow, or it may be the next day. Who knows? Whenever the opportunity hits me.